are you? My name's Pete Farrelly. I'm of the Farrelly brothers. You probably know me from my movies, Dumb and Dumber, Something About Mary, The Three Stooges, Green Book, and recently my TV show Loudermilk, which is on Amazon Prime, which I'm really, really proud of. I'm here today on the Mental Health Coalition channel at the behest of my good friend, Kenneth Cole. He's doing a very ambitious months-long project called Every Day in May. This is a series of one-to-one conversations all about mental health. This is something that we all struggle with. And if you don't personally struggle with it, I know you have somebody in your family who does, or a friend. And I know it's all through my family and my friends. And today I'm really excited to have a conversation with my good friend and somebody I have so much admiration for, Alyssa Milano. I'm going to pull her up here and we're going to start talking.
Hi, Peter.
How are you?
I'm great, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for coming and doing this. It means the world to me, and it's going to mean the world to a lot of other people.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you to Kenneth Cole for doing this incredible thing to just raise awareness and try to erase the stigma attached to mental health issues.
Yeah, people are afraid. This is something that for forever people were afraid to talk about, and it's what your life is. Mental health. If you have good mental health, if you're working on your mental health, you're going to be happier than if you're not. And I know you've been very open about talking about mental health. Why is that?
You know what? I think part of it was that I felt like I had this deep, dark secret that eventually would be found out. And, in our industry, so much of it is about the show must go on. So I had this mentality of, if people know that I'm struggling, I'm not going to get hired anymore. And so that was always in the back of my head, because, we have to go through a vigorous physical to get insured to work. And so I think for me, it was always something that we didn't talk about in my family. I certainly wasn't going to talk about my struggles on set. And really, I think the 40 million Americans in this country, and probably more now after the pandemic, I just swept it under the rug until it was undeniable, and I couldn't sweep it under the rug another second, because I was breaking down. I was breaking open. I was breaking open. So, and I got to tell you, once I was able to share my story, and it's interesting because being an activist, there's so many things that I fight for that I don't feel embarrassed by or feel that I shouldn't discuss. And yet this was something that I felt like I couldn't advocate for myself. Right here, I was this person that was advocating for all of these other issues and for other people's mental health and well-being, but I couldn't advocate for myself. But once I came forward, and what I did was I wound up writing an op-ed for Time magazine about my struggles, specifically with postpartum anxiety, which is when everything sort of came to an apex, although I had struggled my entire life. And it was an incredible thing to be able to share that part of me that felt like I was holding a secret. And to be able to, I did it on your set, actually. There was a day when we were shooting The Now, where I was having a serious, and so my diagnosis is complex PTS, and I have generalized anxiety disorder with panic disorder. So basically what that means is my base level of just functioning is basically I run at a different frequency. And then my panic attacks are on top of that generalized anxiety.
What's interesting, if I could say, is I didn't know you were having any kind of anxiety that day. until you came to me. You hit it very well to me. Maybe
Yeah.
not yourself, but being on set with you, there was no indication that you were struggling at all. And luckily, I remember pulling me aside and said, "Hey, listen, I'm kind of having a panicky feeling coming over me." And I said, "You're coming to the right guy. This is Peter Panic Attack."
Who knew? I didn't even know that about you.
I've had them my whole life, like not my whole life. I honestly started having them in my 20s, and I didn't know what they were, and I struggled with them for many years, and I was afraid to admit what I was having because I was ashamed of it. And that's why I was so impressed when you came to me. I would never have told anybody I was having a panic attack. Eventually I got to that point, by the way. I'm there now, and I'm happy to talk about it. But you had no indication. I had no indication.
Well, functioning anxiety is a real thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can work to your advantage, right? Sometimes being hypervigilant or have tendencies of obsessive compulsive behavior, like sometimes that actually works to your advantage. Like in my work as an activist, I'm able to obsess over things and retain a certain level of information that I feel that a lot of people couldn't retain all at once. And also just the hypervigilance, which is, perfectionism basically, and so everything that I've done in my life, I've had this certain, and I'm sure this is what your anxiety is from too. You have a certain level of expectation of yourself and what you can produce and bring forward, and what you as a director can manage and micromanage. And so, sometimes I'm very grateful for the fact that my brain is diverse. Well, I'm also dyslexic, so that also plays into my anxiety, especially.
I'm dyslexic too. We have all the same things. But anyway, no, mine, it's funny. I don't get it so much when I am in a actually when I'm writing and I'm on a roll, I can get a little anxious and panicky at those times, but I can also get it just lying on a beach in Hawaii on vacation out of the blue.
Yeah.
That's the worst part, is like, and I read this somewhere. It was the best description I heard of the kind of panic attacks I have. It's like this. They said it's like walking on a tightrope between two high rises, except that would be better because at least then you'd know what you were afraid of. And still, I have that fear, that level of fear. I could be lying on a beach in Maui on a perfectly sunny day, and this thing comes over me. Oh my God, I'm dying, And it took me years to realize that, what it was. And, when you don't know what it is, I would lie. Like I'd get off airplanes. I'd be on an airplane about to take off, and something come over, boom, get off an airplane. I call my boss. This is back when I was a salesman, and say, hey, they canceled my flight. And I just hope he doesn't check on it, because I couldn't just say, hey, I freaked out on an airplane and I got off it. It was embarrassing.
Right.
And the more I've come to learn about it, is the less I'm embarrassed, the more I realize, well, that's what makes me a creative person. I don't know many people in our industry who don't have, who aren't dealing with mental health issues at some point or another. And so when you came to me that day, I thought, oh, this is great. I know exactly what you're going through. And by the way, this is what the other great thing was. You took your time. I said, okay, it's okay. It's all good. You're safe. I understand it. Let's get through it. And you went and you took not very long, a few minutes, and you came back and you shot and you nailed it. And you did everything perfectly. And that's why I asked you to do this, because I was so impressed with the way you handle your anxiety.
Well, that's after many, many years of trying to figure out what works for me and the tools. And because, as you know, and I'm sure, people who are struggling with mental health issues who are watching us right now know, sometimes the things will help, for some reason, you just have it in your mind that you can't do it in that moment when you're in, like, I am totally aware that grounding myself and looking, or being outside barefoot, or looking at the trees and looking at the clouds and trying to find five things, trying to find five things that I hear, all of that works. But when I am in the throes of a panic attack, for some reason, I have to force myself to do those things. And I don't know what that is, because I know that these tools work. And it's funny, the thing about lying on the beach, that happens to me too sometimes. And I think, the way it has been described to me is like our emotions and our stresses are put into sort of like this garbage can, this trash can inside of us. And sometimes the trash can doesn't get all the way full, or we don't realize it's all the way full until we're on the beach and we can acknowledge that we are, still. And then we're like, oh shit, I need to take the trash out.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes that's the panic attack, just kind of rebooting the nervous system.
Yeah. Well,
and also,
yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Also, I think that this is very cyclical, right? Like once I am in this, like once I get a bad panic attack, it's not that it'll last a week straight with no relief, but it is definitely my go-to in my brain, right? Yeah. Like I'll get a panic attack. The next morning I'll be fine, but that evening I'll be like, oh God, am I going to have another panic attack? And sure enough, because that's where my brain's used to going, it goes into fight or flight, and I get another panic attack. And so it's so cyclical. And I call it like, that's when I'm in my crisis mode, because that's when I just can't shake it.
There are many reasons people have panic attacks, and they're not all life stresses. Sometimes it's a chemical thing. Sometimes it's a life stress. Sometimes it's this and that. I know for me, when I get a little panicky, it does help for me to meditate. I meditate. I've been meditating for a few years now, and I can just basically, take my mind and silence it and go into a very pleasant place. It's like I always figured, if we get news some morning that a meteor is coming, going to hit the earth and we're all done, I'll just kiss my wife and kids, and then I'll meditate and I'll be fine with it.
Which, by the way, did you see the news? The news is that there's a rocket floating out in space that might hit the earth.
I have not seen that.
Okay, well, I don't want to panic you, but I'll send you the link later.
Just so you know, like, and I talk about it all the time, is I eventually went on Zoloft. Now, I didn't have Zoloft. People think, it's an antidepressant, but I didn't have depression at all. I had anxiety and panic attacks. And I went on Zoloft actually 25 years ago, and I've never had a full-blown panic attack since. I've gotten, I've gotten panicky. Yeah, it worked for me like right away. And I've been having panic attacks for 15 years. And when I went on it, I really felt no different at all. And except I don't have panic attacks, and it's a great thing. So I just don't want to think like people to think, well, you have to, just make yourself calm down. You can, some people do, and that's great, but I didn't. And I take, the smallest dose of Zoloft every morning, and it does help me. By the way, before I forget, I want to encourage people to go back on the Mental Health Coalition channel and watch other of these interviews. Katie Couric did an interview with Officer Kevin Briggs and Kevin Berthia that just blew my mind. It was gorgeous, beautiful, life-affirming story. And also Michael Strahan and Dean Ice were fantastic. So please go back and watch these when you get a chance. This is really great talking to you about this. It does my heart good.
Me too. It feels so helpful, doesn't it? And that's where I'd like us to get to a place of, as a society, as a country, where taking care of your mental health is as basic as going to the dentist.
Exactly.
Right. And we need to get to that point. And that's how I'm raising my kids. My kids have, we don't call it a therapist, we call it a feelings doctor. Mm-hmm. You have a doctor for your teeth, you have a doctor for your brain. And we're trying to instill tools at a young age that they take care of their mental health. And I think it's really important, because I didn't have any of that. No. And by the way, my mom does have anxiety and depression, and we just never talked about it. My grandmother, who is still alive in Brooklyn, is agoraphobic. She hasn't been out of the house in 30 years.
Yeah.
So this is clearly something that runs in the family. And yet, you know, and for me, on top of all of that, and I don't know what the situation is for you, but besides just the genetic aspect and the chemical imbalance, which I had after I gave birth to Milo, I had very bad postpartum anxiety, but also I have trauma.
Yeah.
I have a lot of trauma in my life, sexual assault trauma. And so that also triggers, you know, a certain sense of not being well, or being able to feel like, you know, shame is a big thing with trauma survivors. I am also on medication. Clearly has not slowed me down.
No.
I don't think there should be a stigma around taking medication for issues of mental health. I mean, when you think about if you had a heart issue, you'd be on medication, or if you have high cholesterol, you would be on a medication, high blood pressure, you'd be on a medication. Why not, you know, take something that helps your brain to balance it out?
And it's like I always talk about it, the rowboat. You know, there's the biblical story about the guy in the flood, and he gets on his roof of his house, and a rowboat comes over. His neighbor says, "Hop in." He goes, "No, I believe in God. It's going to be okay." And does it like 3 times. Another neighbor, get in. "No, I believe in God. I'll be okay." And finally, the third one goes away. The water goes up. He drowns. He dies. He goes to heaven. He says, "God, I trusted you. Why didn't you know, help me in my time of need?" He said, "I sent you 3 fucking rowboats. Come on."
Right.
And these are rowboats. These are like, you know, things like get in, you know. By the way, I'm glad you mentioned therapy, because I was talking about doing it yourself or doing it with medication. But therapy, yeah, I didn't grow up. My town, I don't know if there was a psychiatrist in my town. And we never talked about that. The only time I ever saw therapy was in a movie. You'd see somebody going to a shrink. That was something that didn't exist. But I'm very open, like, and I don't always go, but when I have little, you know, moments in my life where I need therapy, I'll go. And I'll go for 3 to 4, 5, 6 months. And sometimes it actually gets to the point where the therapist says, "I think we're good. We've worked through it." And I'm like, great, which is nice. I don't want to like just become like, you know, stuck in there. But
yes, but I find that for me, the times that I'm not in crisis mode and I'm in therapy, I actually find the most beneficial. And for me, somatic experiencing, do you know anything about somatic experiencing? That's the therapy that's worked really well for me. It's the theory of, you know, if you were to watch animals in the wild, you know, who have fight or flight pretty much all day, right? I mean, they're killing their food and they're running away from predators, but they all do something to reset their nervous system, whether that be wag their tail or thump their leg. And it's a physical reaction to that fear. And yet, you know, we're not taught to do that. But if you look at the Native Americans, who at the end of a long day would dance around a fire together, that was a way of getting out. You know, have you read the book, The Body Keeps the Score?
I have not.
Well, it is basically about how we store the trauma. We store all of these little things in pockets in our body. And it's so interesting because when I first started going to a somatic experience therapist, I would start talking about my trauma, and all of a sudden I would get like weird, like pains in my thigh out of nowhere. And so it's kind of a cross between mental therapy and physical therapy, because then we work through that area that it's stored in my body. I also want to say we are having this conversation and we are very privileged because we have access to healthcare and we have access to therapists. But I want people to understand that a lot of addiction issues, a lot of homelessness happens because you know, people don't have access to the same type of healthcare and mental health care, and so they self-medicate, right? And that self-medication is what, you know, sends out or deadens the fight or flight mechanism in our brainstem. And we have to learn to look at these people with more compassion, but also we all have to advocate that everyone has access to mental health care. Everyone in this country. There should not be anyone that has to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol in order to feel or to deaden the pain that they're feeling from mental health issues.
I'm glad you brought up addiction, because that's a huge part of it. You're right. And homelessness and all this. You're the best, by the way.
You're the best.
I've never seen you, like, whenever I read about some cause you're behind, I'm always in sync with. I'm always in agreement. It's never. I think, what the hell is she talking about? I'm thinking, wow, good for you. Your heart's in the right place, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'm in now, Dr. Debra Kissen, who is is the co-chair of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. And she's going to just kind of shine a light on what we've discussed and add, her 2 cents.
Great. I'm excited.
How are you, doctor?
I'm so good.
Maybe you could explain a little bit about how the brain stem works and how it's the most primitive part of the body, and what happens physiologically when we have an anxiety or panic attack.
Yes, and actually I was kind of taking notes on all of your guys' really interesting the conversation, and one of the things that struck me, Alyssa, was when you were talking about having a panic attack and knowing, okay, if I could just ground myself, I would feel better. If I could slow down instead of speed up, I would feel better. So you know, in these moments, rationally, there are things that you can do that could be helpful, yet every cell in your body wants to do the opposite. And that's because, by definition, a panic attack is the fight or flight. So the sympathetic nervous system is ready to fight danger. So our primitive brain gets triggered and thinks, oh no, lion, tiger, bear, warring tribe, immediate danger. It's not thinking modern life, I think I just said something rude by accident to the person next to me. I hope I didn't offend them. It's thinking big muscles, get going. If there's a chance we're going to survive, we got to get the blood pumping. We got to take in more oxygen. And maybe there's a chance we're going to survive.
Do you think it's about changing the narrative that when that happens, when anxiety takes hold or you get a panic attack, that your body is actually doing what it was made to do? Because in caveman days, they needed that primitive part of their brain that was going to tell them to run from danger. So, I mean, I think we think so often that it's our brain's malfunctioning.
Yeah, it's doing some amazing. Without it, it'd be like, oh, lion, that's cool. You want to hang out? Our ancestors that didn't have a really active amygdala, they wouldn't be our ancestors, actually, because they didn't survive very long. So it was, we're supposed to, and even in modern life, it's just about, it's kind of like having hammers are really good, but if we're hammering all the time, then we get a big hole. So it's about balance, like anything else. And when that does happen, not being mad at our brain, even though it's real uncomfortable, understanding it's just a little overzealous versus it's our enemy and it's trying to really like hurt us.
What do you think is like the biggest misconception that you want to see the stigma erased from?
I think kind of like when Peter was saying when he was having panic attacks in his 20s and he didn't really tell anyone about it, and it could feel so terrifying, either like you're dying, you're going crazy, you're losing control. And like you said on the set, that you, if anything, you're performing wonderfully because actually you're overly controlled. Because in that moment they're having a panic attack, we have all this fuel, but we're not really doing anything. We're just sitting there. So if someone having a panic attack often looks like someone might say to them, like, you seem so calm. You look like the opposite because you're like keeping everything so tightly in. So just understanding that it's a false alarm and it's so uncomfortable, but not dangerous. So that's what I always tell people, like, it doesn't mean it's fun. It doesn't mean you're happy you're having it, but you're not in danger.
Yeah.
Or uncomfortable.
That is a good thing to know, because like I've had them where normally I'm like, you wouldn't know, you'd look at me and you wouldn't know that anything's going on. But I have had them where, you know, pre-Zoloft, I must say, where like the night before we started shooting Dumb and Dumber, which was our first movie, I had a massive panic attack, and we were in Colorado, and I was suddenly like, what the hell? You know, we had never made a movie. I'd never gone to film school. I'd never shot a commercial. I hadn't done a documentary. I hadn't done a short film. I'd never been around cameras. And yet we had convinced New Line that we were the right guys to direct the movie. My brother Bob.
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Yep.
I still have that, by the way. But anyway, but my brother was there like, calm down. Like my brother's like, he doesn't get panic attacks. And he's like, what are you doing? I said, what are we doing? He goes, relax, we're here. It's all over. And I remember he talked me off a ledge with Sidney Jackson Bartholomew Jr., my buddy who was there, and also Charlie Wessler. They were like, Pete, it's okay. It's all going to be okay. And it was okay. It turned out great. And but that was just a full-fledged, like, you know, what do I do? And when you're having that, in my case, I started thinking I was having a heart attack, but, you know, there were no indication. I had no chest pain, you know, nothing. It was just head, everything's falling apart.
I would go to the emergency room.
Right. And that's how it often starts. People, you think that you're dying, and it's good if you haven't had a panic attack and you start having those sensations. It's smart to go to the emergency room because it really does feel like there's something very physically wrong. So the first,
well, in my state of panic, I would think like I have to go to the emergency room because, and this is the spiraling out of control, because I have low blood pressure, and if I medicate myself here, then I'm going to die in my sleep.
Right.
Like I literally get myself to that point where I'm like, you know what? I just feel more comfortable going to the hospital so someone can watch my heart monitor. Like I get to that place of total, you know, rather than just doing what I need to do to feel better. And also, like rationally, I could say to you, I know exactly what they're going to give me as far as medication goes at the hospital. And I have all of that in the house. So there's no real reason for me to go, except in those moments, I just spiral into this place of like, you know, the never ending cycle.
Yeah. How do I know for sure? What if this time I'm 99% sure it's a panic attack, but how do I know for sure? And exactly that intolerance of uncertainty.
I think
for sure.
It's a great time to get out because we're leaving wanting more, because I want people to go watch the other shows that are on here, which are fantastic. And I highly recommend people. I learned so much watching the Katie Couric interview. I can't tell you. And people are going to learn watching all these things. But Dr. Kissen, thank you so much for coming on. You may be hearing from me because my whole family has anxiety.
My pleasure.
Alyssa, I'm so grateful. You're my hero. You really are.
I love you so much, Peter. Thank you for supporting me and all that I am.
Well,
thank you
all, and thanks for tuning in, everybody. Please watch the other ones.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.